Here is $3, you look sad. Go get a snack for yourself. The voice was tiny, like a bell ringing in a graveyard. Kangdi didn't move at first. He stood under a massive black silk umbrella, the rain drumming a rhythmic, aggressive beat against the fabric. His suit was worth more than most people made in a year. His slicked-back hair didn't have a strand out of place, and the tattoos snaking up his neck warned the world that he was a man who dealt in shadows. Behind him, 2 bodyguards stood like stone statues, their hands folded, eyes scanning the perimeter. They were ready to break ribs for their boss, but they weren't prepared for this. Kangdi looked down. A small girl, no older than 5, stood in the downpour. She wore a faded denim top, and her hair was intricately braided with colorful beads that sparkled against her dark skin. She wasn't afraid. While most grown men in Seoul crossed the street to avoid Kangdi's gaze, this child was reaching out, pressing 3 crumpled bills into his hand. A snack. Kangdi's voice was like grinding gravel. He hadn't spoken a kind word in years. Mommy says when people have the gray face, they are hungry for kindness, the girl said, her Korean surprisingly fluent but flavored with a soft, melodic accent. You have the grayest face I've ever seen. Hello, family. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments so I can send you special regards for being part of the Mafia Stories family, and also hit the subscribe button to subscribe to this channel. Now let's continue the story. Kangdi felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his chest. He looked at the $3. It was lunch money. It was a fortune to a child. He looked up to find where she had come from, and his eyes met a woman standing 20 paces away. She was a black woman, perhaps in her 30s, wearing a thin jacket that was soaked through. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than sleep. Her eyes widened in pure, visceral terror as she realized who her daughter was talking to. She knew the tattoos. She knew the black sedans idling at the curb. She rushed forward, her boots splashing in the puddles. Maya, no, come here. She grabbed the girl's hand, bowing deeply and repeatedly to Kangdi, her voice trembling. I am so sorry, sir. She is just a child. She didn't mean to bother you. Please, please forgive her. Kangdi didn't respond. He just watched as the mother practically dragged the child away into the misty rain of the Mapo district. He looked down at the $3 in his palm. His bodyguard stepped closer. Boss, should we clear them out? One asked. Kangdi closed his fist over the money, his eyes fixed on the woman's retreating back. No, he whispered. Find out where she works. Amara's heart was still hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird as she clocked into her second shift at the 24-hour convenience store. She had moved to Korea with dreams of teaching and a better life, but the reality of being a single mother and an immigrant had turned into a cycle of debt and survival. She watched Maya coloring on a piece of cardboard in the back room. Maya, you must never talk to men like that, Amara whispered, her hands shaking as she stocked shelves with ramen. That man is a king of the dark. He doesn't want snacks. But he was crying, Mommy, Maya said without looking up. Not from his eyes, from his soul. Amara sighed, rubbing her aching back. She didn't have time for soul talk. She owed 5 million won to a group of local thugs who charged 30% interest weekly. She was drowning. Outside, the rain continued. She didn't notice the black sedan parked at the edge of the street lamps. Inside the car, Kangdi watched the store's monitors through a hacked feed on his tablet. He watched Amara handle rude customers with a polite smile, watched her sneak a piece of bread to her daughter, and watched her wince every time the door chime rang. He saw the exhaustion. He saw the gray face the child had mentioned. Suddenly, the store door swung open with a violent crash. 3 men entered. They weren't wearing suits like Kangdi. They wore tracksuits and cheap gold chains. These were the vultures, low-level bottom feeders who preyed on those who couldn't fight back. Hey, Africa, the leader shouted, slamming his hand on the counter. Where is our money? Amara turned pale. I told you I get my paycheck on Friday. Please, my daughter is right there. The leader leaned over the counter, grabbing a display of candy and throwing it across the room. Friday was 3 days ago in my head. Pay up, or we start taking things from the store. Or maybe we take that pretty little girl back there. In the car, Kang Dee's grip tightened on the $3 bills until his knuckles turned white. He didn't wait for his bodyguards to open the door. The three thugs spun around, ready to attack whoever had interrupted them. When they saw Kang Dee standing there, alone, his umbrella dripping onto the linoleum floor, the leader sneered. "Piss off, old man. This is vulture business," the thug spat. Kang Dee didn't look at the men. His eyes were on Amara, who was shielding Maya behind her legs. The girl peeked out, her eyes brightening. "The sad man," she chirped. The lead thug laughed. "The sad man? Is this your boyfriend, Africa? He looks like he's got one foot in the grave." Kang Dee finally looked at the leader. It was a look that had ended wars in the Busan shipyards. "You are making a lot of noise in a very quiet neighborhood," Kang Dee said softly. "And what are you going to do about it?" The thug pulled a small flick knife from his pocket. In one fluid motion, Kang Dee stepped forward. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed the man's wrist, and with a sickening crack, the knife fell to the floor. The thug screamed, dropping to his knees. The other two lunged, but the door burst open as Kang Dee's bodyguards moved in like shadows. It was over in seconds, not a single shot fired, just the sound of heavy impact and the whimpering of broken men. "Take them to the alley," Kang Dee ordered. "Remind them who owns the air they breathe." The bodyguards dragged the vultures out. Silence returned to the store, save for the hum of the refrigerators. Amara stood frozen, clutching Maya. She wasn't relieved, she was terrified. She had just seen one monster devour another. Kang Dee walked toward the counter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $3. He set it carefully on the counter next to the cash register. "You dropped this," he said. Amara looked at the money, then at him. Why did you help us? People like you don't do things for free." Kang Dee looked at the little girl, then back at Amara. "Your daughter bought a debt she couldn't afford. I'm just here to make sure the interest is paid." He turned to leave, but Amara called out, "They'll come back. Once you're gone, they'll kill us for what you did to them." The drive to the Gangnam district was silent, save for the hum of the Mercedes-Benz and the soft breathing of Maya, who had finally fallen asleep against her mother's side. Amara looked out the window, watching the neon signs of Seoul blur into streaks of electric blue and cherry red. She felt like a prisoner, even though the leather seats were softer than any bed she had ever slept on. Kang Dee sat in the front passenger seat, his silhouette sharp and unmoving. He wasn't looking at her, but she could feel his presence, a heavy, suffocating weight. "Where are you taking us?" Amara finally whispered, her voice cracking. "I have a job, I have a life. You can't just pluck us off the street because you played hero for 5 minutes." Kang Dee tilted his head slightly, catching her eye in the rearview mirror. "The men I removed tonight were low tier. Their boss, a man named Choi, is a vulture who doesn't like losing his meal. If I left you at that store, you wouldn't have made it to sunrise. You aren't being kidnapped, Ms. Amara. You are being relocated." "I don't need relocation. I need my paycheck," she hissed, trying not to wake Maya. "Your paycheck is 2 million won," Kang Dee said coldly. "Your debt is 5 million. Your life is worth 0 to them. Do the math." The car pulled into the underground garage of a high-rise complex that looked like a fortress of glass and steel. Kang Dee stepped out, and his bodyguard, a man named Min Ho, opened Amara's door. They were led to a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. It was cold, minimalist, and smelled of expensive sandalwood and old rain. "Sleep," Kang Dee commanded, gesturing to a guest suite that was larger than Amara's entire apartment in Itaewon. "There is food in the kitchen, clothes in the closet. My men are at the door. You are safe." "Safe from who?" Amara asked, stepping toward him. "Safe from the world or safe from you?" Kang Dee stepped into her space. Up close, she could see the faint scars on his knuckles and the exhaustion in his eyes that Maya had noticed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped chocolate bar, something he must have grabbed from the store during the chaos. "Safe from everyone," he said, handing her the chocolate, "including yourself." The next morning, the sun hit the Seoul skyline like a sheet of hammered gold. Amara woke up to the smell of juk, Korean rice porridge, and fresh coffee. She found Maya already at the massive dining table, laughing as she tried to teach a stone-faced bodyguard how to play a hand-clapping game. Kang-dee was at the head of the table, reading a physical newspaper, looking like a CEO rather than a mobster. He looked up as Amara entered. "Sit," he said. "We need to talk about your future." "My future involves going back to work," Amara said, her defensive walls back up. "I appreciate the breakfast and the protection, but I don't belong here. People like you and people like me, we don't occupy the same universe." "You're right," Kang-dee said, folding his paper. "In my universe, people take what they want. In yours, people give until they have nothing left. Your daughter gave me $3 yesterday. Do you know what I was doing when she walked up to me?" Amara stayed silent. "I was standing in the rain, waiting for a signal to authorize a hit on a rival," Kang-dee confessed, his voice devoid of emotion. "I was ready to end a life, and then a small girl told me I looked sad and offered me her snack money. She broke my focus. She saved a man's life without knowing it." Amara felt a chill. She looked at Maya, who was blissfully unaware of the darkness surrounding them. "I looked into your debt," Kang-dee continued, sliding a folder across the table. "You've been paying interest on a loan your late husband took out, a loan that was illegal to begin with. You've paid back the principal 3 times over. The vultures were just using you as a recurring ATM." He stood up, his tall frame casting a long shadow over the room. "Today, I am going to end that contract, but I need you to understand something, Amara. Once I interfere, you are linked to me. The police won't help you, and my enemies will know your name. Is your freedom worth the risk of my company?" Kang-dee didn't look worried. He looked bored. He adjusted his cufflinks and turned to Amara. "Stay in this room. Do not open the door for anyone but me or Minho." He descended to the building's private lounge, where Choi, a greasy man in a loud suit, and a sharp-looking man in a legal robe were waiting. "Kang-dee," Choi sneered, leaning back on a white leather sofa. "You've crossed a line. You touched my men. You took my property. That woman owes me money. And now you're interfering with civilians." The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice oily. "Mr. Kang-dee, we have reports of kidnapping and assault. If the woman isn't released to Mr. Choi immediately, I will have a warrant for this entire building within the hour. Is a foreign laborer really worth your empire?" Kang-dee walked to the bar and poured a glass of whiskey. He didn't offer them any. "The woman isn't a laborer. She's an employee of my charitable foundation. Her daughter is a ward of my protection." Choi laughed. "Charity, you're a shark, Kang-dee, just like me." Kang-dee turned, his eyes flashing with a sudden predatory heat. "No, Choi, I am a whale. You are a parasite. You thrive on the weak. I thrive on the strong. There is a difference." He pulled out a tablet and laid it on the table. It showed a series of bank transfers, illegal kickbacks from Choi's gambling dens to the prosecutor's private offshore account. The prosecutor's face went from smug to ghostly pale in a heartbeat. "Here is the deal," Kang-dee said, his voice a low growl. "You will sign a document stating that Amara's debt is settled in full. You will never speak her name. You will never enter the Mapo district again. And in exchange, I don't send this file to the Blue House." Choi looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor looked at the floor. With shaking hands, Choi signed the papers. "You're making a mistake," Choi hissed as he stood to leave. "You're getting soft for a woman who doesn't even speak your language. It'll be your head on the block next, Kang-dee." As they left, Kang-dee stood alone in the lounge. He looked at the $3 bills, which he had framed in a small glass case on his desk. He had won the battle, but he knew Choi was right about one thing: he was changing. The air in the shipping yard felt like it had been sucked out of a vacuum. The only sound was the metallic patter of rain hitting the rusted iron containers. Choi's finger whitened on the trigger of the pistol. He was a man who had built an empire on bullying the weak, but standing inches away from Kangdi, he realized he had made a fatal miscalculation. He wasn't looking at a businessman. He was looking at the personification of the storm itself. I said, "Stay back." Choi screamed, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. Amara looked up at Kangdi. She saw the barrel of the gun pressed into her own temple, but more importantly, she saw the look in Kangdi's eyes. There was no fear for his own life. There was only a terrifying, focused clarity. In that moment, she realized he wasn't just protecting them because of a debt. He was protecting them because they were the only light left in his gray world. "You're shaking, Choi," Kangdi said, his voice as calm as a frozen lake. "A man who shakes shouldn't hold a weapon. It leads to mistakes, and I am not a man who forgives mistakes." Kangdi took another step. The muzzle of the gun was now pressed directly against the center of his own forehead. He had moved the danger away from Amara and onto himself. It was a move of pure, calculated sacrifice. "You think you're a martyr?" Choi hissed, sweat beads rolling down his face despite the cold. "You think this makes you a hero? You're a killer, Kangdi. You've got more blood on your hands than I'll ever have." "I know exactly what I am," Kangdi replied. "I have earned my place in the dark, but these two, they belong to the sun, and you are standing in their way." In a blur of motion that the human eye could barely track, Kangdi moved. He didn't go for the gun first. He shoved Amara toward the safety of the container gap and twisted his body. The gun went off, the roar of the discharge echoing like a cannon blast through the shipyard, but the bullet grazed nothing but the air where Kangdi had been a millisecond before. Kangdi's hand clamped onto Choi's wrist like a hydraulic press. There was a sickening snap, and the gun clattered to the wet concrete. Choi let out a primal howl of agony, but Kangdi didn't stop. He struck with surgical precision, a palm to the chest to collapse the lungs, a sweep of the leg to bring the man to the earth. Within seconds, the king of the vultures was pinned to the ground, gasping for air, his face pressed into a puddle of oily rainwater. Kangdi stood over him, his boot heavy on Choi's neck. He looked down at the man with a gaze that was colder than the Incheon Sea. "Minho," Kangdi called out. From the shadows, his loyal bodyguards appeared, their own weapons drawn and ready. They had surrounded the perimeter, cutting off any escape for Choi's remaining men. "Take him," Kangdi ordered, his voice devoid of the rage he had shown moments ago. "Hand him over to the authorities, not our usual contacts. Send the evidence of his human trafficking and extortion to the National Intelligence Service. I want him erased, not just from the streets, but from the books." As the guards dragged a sobbing Choi away, the tension began to drain from the yard. Kangdi stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his expensive suit ruined by grease and blood. He looked down at his hands, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime taking. He felt a small, warm pressure against his leg. He looked down to see Maya. She had escaped the grasp of the other thug during the chaos and had been watching from behind a crate. She didn't look at him with horror. She didn't see the violence he had just unleashed. She walked up to him and wrapped her small arms around his knee. "You came," she whispered. "The sad man came to save us." Amara approached slowly, her legs still trembling. She looked at Kangdi, then at her daughter, then back at the man who had just risked his life to play a shield. The wall she had built around her heart, the wall designed to protect her from a world that had always been unkind to her, started to crumble. "You're hurt," Amara said, pointing to a crimson streak on his temple where the gun's slide had kicked back. "It's nothing," Kangdi said, though his voice was softer now. "It's not nothing," Amara insisted. She reached out, her hand hovering near his face before she finally made contact. Her skin was warm against his cold, scarred flesh. "Why did you do it? You could have let us go. You could have stayed in your tower." Kangdi looked at her, and for the first time in the entire story, a genuine, albeit small, smile touched his lips. It transformed his face from a mask of war into something human. "I told you," he said. "Your daughter bought a debt, but I realized tonight I'm the one who owes her. She gave me back my soul for $3. That's a bargain I can never truly repay." Amara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She didn't pull her hand away. In the middle of a dirty, rain-slicked shipyard, surrounded by the remnants of a life of crime, something new was beginning to grow. But as they walked toward the car, a new shadow emerged. A black sedan with government plates sat idling at the exit. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, the district prosecutor from the previous day, the one Kangdi had blackmailed. He wasn't smiling anymore. He had a file in his hand and a team of armed police behind him. "Mr. Kangdi," the prosecutor said, his voice echoing with a new, dangerous authority. "You thought you could threaten me. You forgot that while I may be corrupt, I am still the law, and the law doesn't like being humiliated." The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers reflected in the oily puddles of the shipyard, creating a mosaic of neon chaos. The prosecutor stood with his chin tilted high, a man who felt he had finally reclaimed the upper hand. To him, Amara and Maya were nothing more than pawns, minor characters in a grand game of power. "Handcuff them," the prosecutor commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and triumph. Kangdi's hand remained frozen near the small of his back. His muscles were coiled, his eyes scanning the 6 armed officers. He knew he could take down the first 3 before they even cleared their holsters, but he looked at Maya. She was watching him, her big eyes reflecting the strobe-like lights. If he fought now, the last thing she would remember of him was a monster bathed in blood. "Wait," Kangdi said. The word wasn't a shout. It was a vibration that seemed to settle the air. He slowly raised his hands, palm out, showing he was unarmed. But he wasn't surrendering. He looked directly at the prosecutor. "You think you're using the law to bury me? You've spent too much time in mahogany offices, counselor. You've forgotten how the streets actually work." Kangdi reached into his inner breast pocket, not for a weapon, but for a burner phone. He pressed a single button and held it out. "Listen." A voice began to play over the speaker. It was the prosecutor's own voice, recorded only 20 minutes prior, talking to one of Choi's associates. "Once Kangdi is neutralized, I want my cut of the Incheon docks. And make sure the woman is deported before she can testify. I don't want any loose ends." The prosecutor's face drained of color. That's a fabrication. It's inadmissible." "Maybe in your courtroom," Kangdi said, stepping forward. The police officers hesitated, sensing the shift in power. "But I didn't send this to a judge. I just uploaded it to the Blue House's public ethics portal and sent a copy to every major news outlet in Seoul. In about 30 seconds, your phone is going to start ringing. And it won't be your friend's, it will be your replacement." As if on cue, the prosecutor's phone began to vibrate violently in his pocket. He stared at it as if it were a live grenade. The officers looked at each other, then at their superior. They weren't fools. They knew a sinking ship when they saw one. "Drop the charges," Kangdi said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Walk away, and I might forget to release the second half of that recording, the part where you discuss the bribes from the Busan construction project." The prosecutor looked at Kangdi, then at Amara, his eyes filled with a desperate, impotent rage. He turned on his heel and barked at his men. "False alarm! We're leaving, now." The sirens faded into the distance, leaving the shipyard in a sudden, heavy silence. The threat was gone. The vultures were broken, and the law had been forced to blink. 6 months later, the Itaewon district was bustling with its usual Saturday afternoon energy. The smell of roasted coffee and spicy street food filled the air. In a small, brightly lit corner unit that used to be a dusty warehouse, a new sign hung, "Maya's Garden International Community Center." Inside, the walls were covered in children's drawings. Amara stood behind a desk, looking elegant and at peace. She was no longer wearing the thin, soaked jacket of a fugitive. She was the director of a foundation dedicated to helping immigrant families navigate the complexities of life in Korea, legally, safely, and with dignity. The door chimed. Maya, now wearing a brand new denim dress with even more colorful beads in her hair, let out a squeal of delight. "He's here! He's here!" Kangdi walked in. He looked different. The slicked-back hair was gone, replaced by a softer, more natural style. He wore a simple dark sweater instead of a structured suit. The neck tattoo was still there, a reminder of where he came from, but the gray face was a memory of the past. "You're late," Amara said, a playful smile playing on her lips. She walked over to him, and there was no hesitation in her movement. They had spent the last half-year building something far more difficult than an empire. They had built trust. "The board meeting ran long," Kangdi said, his voice warm. He had officially stepped down from his traditional businesses, handing the reins to Minho to transition the organization into a legitimate logistics firm. He was now the primary benefactor of the center. He looked around the room. "Is she ready?" "I've been ready since breakfast," Maya shouted, grabbing her backpack. They walked out together into the warm Seoul sun. As they passed a small street vendor selling traditional Korean snacks, Kangdi stopped. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 3 crumpled, framed-looking dollar bills that he had kept with him every single day. He looked at them, then at Amara. "I think it's time to finally spend this," he said. He handed the $3 to the vendor and bought a large bag of honey-coated walnuts. He handed the bag to Maya, who took a big bite and grinned, her face lit with pure, unadulterated joy. "See," Maya said, her mouth half full, "I told you, snacks make the gray go away." Kangdi looked at Amara. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. For the first time in 40 years, he didn't feel the need to look over his shoulder. He didn't feel the weight of the crown or the shadow of the gun. He felt the warmth of a hand that had chosen to hold his, despite knowing exactly who he was. They walked down the street, a former mob boss, a resilient mother, and a little girl with a bag of snacks. To the world, they were an unlikely trio, but to each other, they were the answer to a prayer they hadn't known they were whispering. Kangdi realized that life wasn't about the power you wielded over others, but the power you had to change yourself for the people you loved. The $3 hadn't just bought a snack, it had bought a second chance. And as the sun set over Seoul, casting a golden glow over the city, the sad man finally felt at home. The end. Hit the subscribe button to subscribe if you love this story, and also, comment where you are watching from.